All right, welcome back. So today we're going to talk about potential points changes for some squadrons that we might see if FFG is going to go the route of changing some points. And these are some points changes that I wouldn't mind seeing myself. Um, Before we get to that, I have a couple of points of business. First of all, I'm going to be testing my equipment in terms of live streaming. And in order to do that, I'm going to live stream probably myself painting. I'll make a couple of announcements if you see it up. If you can just pop in, say hi, and hang out if you want. If not, that's fine too. But it's mostly going to be for live streaming games, both Armada and for Legion. And I want to get all that equipment tested out. My forte is not audio visual. I'm doing the best that I can, but we'll see how that goes. So if you could pop in, that would be great. Second, we're going to get a whole lot of news this week. I expect a lot of videos from me this week reacting to things that we see, what we hear, based on how much information we get about Clone Wars, information we get about rules changes, all of that kind of stuff. My reaction, how it's going to impact the game, and things like that. So stay tuned for that. And also, if these videos are, if you're enjoying them, if they're helpful to you, please give a subscribe. That really lets me know people are listening, people are watching, and want to see my perspective on how things go. There's a lot of people that are giving their perspective out there, but we each have our own different perspective. We all play in different metas, so there's a lot of information out there. So give us a subscribe so that I know that I've got people that are interested. So let's talk about some squadrons that I think could stand some points adjustments potentially. Now, one thing I want to just mention before we get going is scatter races. Scatter races are super powerful. You won't be seeing me advocating for any reductions in the cost of any scatter races. In fact, I think I only have 2 scatter races in this video at all, and they're both advocating for slight price increases. Scatter is just a hugely valuable, um, defense token to have on a squad, and I don't think that there are any scatter races that are overcosted at the moment. You will see me talking about some unique squadrons, but they won't have that scatter token available to them. So why don't we get? Oh, and so the other thing is, I have a real thing with speed 2 on squads. I have a hard time taking any squad that is only speed 2. Speed 2 is really slow for a squad, and it really is only helpful for a defensive screen. Otherwise, you have to spend a lot of points in order to be able to try and push those squads out with some other abilities that you can get from other upgrade cards and things like that. And I just don't find the value in that. Personal thing, maybe. So I have some issues with a lot of speed 2 squads. You're going to see a fair number of those in this discussion. Not advocating for speed increase, but advocating for points reduction so that they're more, viable to play. So the first squad with that in mind is the Bwing. So the Bwing is a speed 2 squad. Has decent hull for a generic fighter at 5. Has okay anti-squad dice, not super great. 3 anti-squad isn't bad, but it's not great either. It is a bomber and has great anti-ship dice, a blue and a black. So that part of the squad is really good, but that speed 2 is really hard. To push these out in order to engage other ships is really hard. They're really easy for your opponent's squads to catch up to and tie up. And because they don't have a super good punch for anti-squadron, it takes them a while to punch themselves out. And by then, because they're only speed 2, it might be hard for them to catch up to any ships to do any damage to them. So because of that, I'm going to advocate for a couple of point deduction here. I mean, I'd even go down to 11, but 12 would be good. Then I have Hera. So Hera, I think the generic VCX is fine where it is. has good abilities. But Hera, on the other hand, on the Ghost, she's extremely expensive at 28. I believe she's the most expensive squad in the game. Now, she has good abilities, and she's speed 3. She has 8 hull, excellent anti-squadron dice, very good anti-ship dice, although she's not bomber. But she is rogue. She does have grit. Now, so grit is, there's value in grit. I just don't think it's a tremendous value in grit. So I don't, when I'm evaluating squads, grit doesn't, come into play a lot when I'm deciding whether to play a squad or not. Rogue obviously does. It's a hugely valuable ability. Grit is a valuable ability, but not nearly as valuable to me. Now, her big thing is she can take 2 squads in the squadron phase that are close to her and give them rogue. So you could have generic X-Wings, generic B-Wings, generic A-Wings. She can pass them and give them rogue while she has rogue as well. And then they can move and shoot during the squadron phase without having to be activated. That's a really good ability. But I feel like in order to get the most out of that ability, you need to have a lot of squads in the list. So like one turn you can give a couple of them the rogue ability, send them off to do their thing. A lot of times they're going to get out of range to do it again. Or if you only take 3 and you're trying to keep them in a little ball, 1 or 2 of them are going to die, and then you're not going to be able to get the full value out of the ability anyways. So I feel like having a decent sized squadron accompaniment in order to be able to do this is probably best. And when you're paying 28 points for a squad, in order to best utilize that ability, you're restricting the number of points you can spend on other squads. So I think to see Hera more, because I really would like to see Hera more and the Ghost out there more, I'd like to see probably even a 4 or 5 point deduction. I just think 28 points, that's a fully kitted out GR75, so it's a whole nother activation plus right now at 28. So, and even if you went down to 23 or 24 points, that's still a decently kitted out GR75, so it's still a lot of points. So I would like to see Hera's points reduced by a fair amount in order to get her out there more. I know I would play her more if she wasn't quite so expensive. Now we have Chara Bay. So this is our Rebel scatter ace that I have in this discussion. So anyone who has played with or against Chara Bay knows how valuable she is. We talked the other day about something being ubiquitous. So if a Rebel player is going to be playing squads in their list, Chara Bay is really hard not to play. She's just a great squadron. She's great in bomber lists because she can go out there, tie up other squadrons, and so that your bombers can go do their thing. She's great in squad lists because she can do a lot of damage to other squadrons. It's just super valuable. She's speed 5, 4 hull, well, typical A-Wing things. Typical A-Wing 3 anti-squad dice, which isn't super great, but it's okay. That black anti-ship dice, which is really good for an A-Wing. Her big thing is her counter, though. She has counter 3, and not only that, she gets to, her crits count as damage in the counter attack. So her counter attack is actually more powerful than her regular attack. So you get her, you engage her with several of your opponent's squads, and say they're in a little ball of TIE fighters. She can go plop down in a ball of generic TIE fighters, and in the time that it takes for those TIE fighters to punch their way out of their engagement with Chara Bay, she doesn't even have to shoot, and a lot of them are going to take themselves out just by trying to get away from Chara Bay. And TIE Fighter only has 3 hull. They could easily throw, take 3 damage in a counterattack. So, tremendously powerful squad. A little bit too common, I think, in Rebel lists. And because of that, I think that she could stand a 2 to 3 point increase. In my mind, possibly the most powerful Rebel squad there is. Now, the YT 1300. Now, I have the generic one up here, which is speed 2. Even the unique ones with Lando and Han are speed 3s. My problem with that is the Millennium Falcon is supposed to be the fastest hunk of junk in the galaxy, and it is not the fastest hunk of junk in the galaxy in this game. And you would think even the generic YT 1300, even though we could say it's not modified and doesn't have all the enhancements that Lando and Chewie and Han have given it, it still should be faster than speed 2. They're not going to make that many improvements to it. So thematically, the YT 1300 just isn't fitting for my taste. Now, with that said, I said we're not going to change the squads. So based on that, you do get escort with the generic YT 1300, which is a good ability, but I believe that you don't see this enough because of the speed 2, and the only way without changing anything else to get it out there more would be to reduce the cost by maybe 2 points, get it down to 11. Now on the flip side of that, we have the YT 2400. YT 2400 is speed 4, has 6 hull. It's only 1 less hull than the 1300. Has the 4 anti-squad dice, which is great. It has the black anti-ship dice, so stronger against squads than an A-Wing, the same as an A-Wing against ships, and it's rogue. And it's only 16 points. In my mind, probably the best generic squadron in the game. Now, does come in the rogues and villains. A lot of people don't have a lot of them. They have 1 or 2. I happen to have more than that. So in some ways, I'm hurting myself by saying this, but I do think the YT 2400 probably could stand a little bit of a point increase, because with that speed 4 and rogue, they can just zip around the board and be throwing dice at ships or squadrons, almost at will. So I would say, 2, maybe even 3 point increase for the 2600 or the 2400. And then we have the Lancer class pursuit craft. In my meta here, I don't know that I've ever maybe seen it once in a game. And it's not the most iconic ship in the world. It's not that I really want to see this out there more, but in order to see it at all, I think the only way you're going to do that is to give it a little point decrease. It's speed 4, same as the YT 2400. It's only got 4 hull though, so you're losing a couple of hull. You're losing an anti-squadron dice. You do have the black anti-ship and its bomber. That's good. It has the grit, which I said is valuable but not very. And it has the rogue. And it's only 1 point cheaper than the 2400. To lose the 2 hull, to lose the anti-squadron dice, and only gain back the bomber, for 1 point, I'd take the YT 2400 every day over the Lancer. The blank, in terms of the black anti-ship dice, the thing with that is, even without bomber, you still have the same chance to get a hit. The bomber is only just giving you 2 chances out of 8 to get a crit as well. So you still have a 6 and 8 chance of getting a hit, whether it's bomber or not. You just get a slight increase in getting a little extra damage when it's bomber and a black. it's not like you're increasing your odds of getting any damage like you do with the blue. So I think the black bomber here isn't giving you as much extra as just having the generic black on the 2400. So I think in order to get the Lancers out there, I think you have to reduce the costs. Probably 3 points on this one. Now we're going to go to the Imperial side of things. Now this is the Mandalorian Gauntlet Fighter. Now this fighter is unique in that it's the only fighter that didn't come in the core set or Squadron pack. It actually came with the Chimera ISD expansion in Wave 7, and you got 2 of them in that expansion. So most people don't have very many of these. I only have the 2 because I only got the 1 Chimera because I already had a couple of other ISDs. Now, there was a lot of worry going into Wave 7 that these squadrons were going to force you to have to buy multiple of a pack just to get enough squadrons if they were really good. Now, they didn't turn out to be that great. One thing is, so Assault, where you get a raid token, you can give a raid token to a ship. Raid hasn't turned out to be that super powerful ability that I think FFG was thinking it would be. At least in my meta, it's not heavily valued ability to be able to give your opponents raid, whether it's from a squadron or through a boarding party or whatever it is. So we don't see a lot of raid, and because of that, I think maybe FFG overvalued the assault ability on this one. It does have it's a speed 4 rogue, which is, I already said, is super powerful, has 7 hull, that's great. The anti-squadron on this, you've got that little extra potential out of that red dice, so you could get 4 damage on this potentially. Personally, I think the red in this case is worse than the blue. I'd rather have the better chance of getting 3 than that slight chance I could get 4. So I slightly, I deduct a little bit on this, for that red dice. And then it has 2 blue anti-ship, which is good. And it's good when you're talking about the assault because it gives you the extra opportunity to be able to use the assault if that's what you're trying for. But in my experience, that's not why people are doing the Gauntlet Fighter, if you see them at all. I mean, it's another fighter that you don't see very often. Every once in a while, you see somebody trying it just to see if they can get any value out of it. But I think a lot of people will end up saying at the end of the game that it wasn't worth the points that they paid for it. So I do think that the Gauntlet Fighter, just to get it on the board a little bit more, and maybe getting it on the board more will get people to see the value in raid more. I don't know. But in order to do that, probably a 2 or 3 point decrease here. And then you have the unique version of the Gauntlet Fighter, which is Gar Saxon. Now, he doesn't have a tremendous extra ability to the generic, like a lot of uniques do. And that's kind of reflected in the cost, and he's only costed 3 points more than the generic. Speed is the same, hull is the same, the anti-squad dice are the same. Anti-ship dice, you change one of the blues to a black, so that does help with assault a little bit, gives you a little bit more potential getting assault out there. You still have the rogue, and he has this extra ability that he can, just by being close to intel and relay ships, that he can kind of force through a damage just by them activating. Intel and relay, they're things that you have out there, but a lot of times you're only going to bring 1 intel ship or 1 relay ship, maybe 2 occasionally, depending on the fleet. So you're not going to have a lot of opportunity to use that ability either. So I think with Gar, just like the generic, I think a 2 or 3 point reduction here is appropriate. I don't think he needs to be super cheap, but I think at 20 points he's still going to be expensive, but you're still paying for speed 4 rogue with 7 hull, which is really good. then I did put Eval here on one of the newest unique YV666. I believe this is the only card that I put in this discussion from Rebellion in the Rim. So it's a newer squad, so we may not have had enough chance to really evaluate them yet, especially with the pandemic and people not being able to play for the last few months. But in general, I think he's only 1 point cheaper than Bosk, and I think Bosk is much better. So I would take Bosk any day over Eval. They do get a speed increase over the generic. You get to go up to speed 3, 7 hull, great anti-squad dice, double blue anti-ship dice. These are all good things that, weak but positive grit and rogue. He has this ability that deals with moving an objective token. Now, it's a little bit unique because it's not when you're only when your enemy moves an objective token. It could be when you're moving an objective token too. So that can be valuable if that's what you're trying to do in your list. If you're going for that second player objective token manipulation type of a list, he could be valuable there. We don't see a ton of that here, and it would mean that you'd have to bring him. You'd have to bring, a lot of intel in order, or a lot of ability to move tokens around. So so that means you're bringing a lot of Imperial shuttles as well, which are expensive. So it's a little tough. I think maybe what FFG was thinking with him is prior to Rebellion in the Rim coming out, there were a lot of fish farm lists which were really affecting the meta in a negative way in a lot of ways. And I think maybe he was put out there in order to counter the fish farm lists. But other changes to rules came out that really affected the viability of the fish farm lists, so we don't see those very much anymore. So in order to get Eval out there when he's competing with Bosk for playtime, I think he would need a couple of point decrease. Again, he's got good stats. I just think his ability might be a little overvalued here. So maybe get him down to 20 or so. Valen Rudor, this is my Imperial scatter ace. Now, as far as scatter aces go, he's not super powerful. He does have an ability where your opponent can't attack him if your opponent is also engaged with another squadron. So he usually goes into the center of a ball and you surround him with other squadrons, and then your opponent can't attack him. So that is a valuable thing. Now, he does only have black anti-squad dice, so he isn't very effective against scatter aces. He can get him to burn a scatter, I suppose, but he's not going to generally push a lot of damage through. And otherwise he has typical TIE fighter stats, including swarm and the blue anti-ship dice. But he is a scatter ace, and scatter aces, I think, they're really strong in the game right now. So I would think a couple of point increase on Valen would be appropriate. Then we have the Decimator, and this is the generic Decimator. I think the unique Decimator sees an okay amount of play, but the generic Decimator, maybe not so much. I mean, it's a powerful squadron, but it is, for a generic, it's by far the most expensive generic squadron out there at 22 points. It has Great Hull, it has Rogue, it has Speed 3, which is good. It does have those black anti-squad dice, which we just talked about with Valen. And it has 3 anti-ship dice, so the most anti-ship dice in the game. It doesn't have bomber, but that's okay. When you're throwing 3 blues, you have a decent chance of getting a couple of damage through. It does have counter one. Counter one is okay. I don't think it's not something that is gonna your opponent's gonna worry too much about in terms of attacking you. But it does have heavy, so heavy is something that we haven't talked about yet. So heavy doesn't tie down other squadrons, and I think that's a little bit of a problem. So this is a tax. This is a negative ability. So this is actually reducing your value. And I think that the heavy bit of this really makes, it really makes me think anyways about taking this in a list, because I know it's not going to be able to tie down other squadrons. If my opponent doesn't have any squadrons, then it's great, but it's not going to be super effective in going after squadrons. So I think because it's so expensive, I think a couple of point decrease down to 20 here or so. It is a super powerful squadron, but I just think with that heavy, it needs a little bit of a decrease in points to get people to consider it more. And now the YV666. So this is a squadron that I have tried over and over and over again to get to work in the game. And this is going to be the last squadron that we talk about. I do have one more image that we're going to see in a minute that is a comparison to the YV666. But it's speed 2, and we've talked about that enough. Has 7 hull, which is great. Great anti-squadron dice. Good anti-ship, but not great. That grit ability. And it has the heavy. And we just talked about heavy and how that's a real problem. And I think it's even a bigger problem with a speed 2 squad. It's a granted it's rogue, but it's speed 2. It's really easy for other squadrons or even ships to get away from you and not have to worry about you too much. So I wanted to compare the YV666 to another Imperial squad in the game, and that's the TIE Defender. So the TIE Defender, you do lose rogue, but you're speed 5, you only lose 1 hull, you're still at 6, which is a tremendous amount of hull for a squadron. You have the exact same great anti-squadron dice, the same anti-ship dice, although it is bomber. So in this case, we're talking about blue bomber over black bomber. I think blue bomber is way better than generic blue anti-ship, where we talked about the black bomber not being quite as great compared to non-bomber black anti-ship. So there is value there in it being bomber, and the rogue is a valuable ability, so that is going to increase the value of the YV666. But when you're talking about the comparison between the two, the difference between speed 5 and speed 2 is huge. Speed 5 can be almost anywhere on the board that you want. They can go anywhere. Now granted, they're not rogues, so if they get out of range of their ships, you're not going to be able to activate them, and you'll have to be a skilled player in order to be able to keep them in range of ships and squadrons and things like that. But I think for the YV666 to be considered over just a regular defender, at speed 2 with heavy, it needs a point decrease. And I would say probably a 2, maybe 3, probably 2 point decrease in its points in order to make it, more palatable to play. But thank you very much for watching. Again, please think about giving a thumbs up, giving me a subscribe. I'll let everybody know when I'm going to be trying that live stream. I'd like to see some people pop in and just say hi. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.